Hi everyone and welcome back to my channel. Today I wanted to do a tag video. Basically it's called the Why I Haven't Read These Books tag that explores why I haven't read these books in basically 5 different categories. One being classic books, fiction books, non-fiction books, genre fiction, and then the longest book on the TBR. And I was tagged by Laurane from Reading with Laurane, and she's actually tagged me in a few different tags, but this one was the one I felt like I could actually talk about without giving answers that I've already given, or just giving answers that are like, I don't know. So today I thought I would finally reply to one of her tag videos and take you guys along with my bright neon yellow dress that I absolutely love but I never get to wear, and it's so bright that I had to close the curtains because the sun was reflecting off of it and was like killing the light. But anyway, I hope you enjoy this video and my fun dress. So the first category is why have I not read these classic fiction? So to add an extra twist to this video, I thought, because I tend to focus on a lot of Japanese based fiction and nonfiction, I would split these questions not only into the genre it's asking me about, but also have a Japanese answer and then have a non-Japanese answer. So why have I not read these classics? Non-Japanese answer first. Victor Hugo. Why have I not read On l'Islande yet? Why have I not read Les Travailleurs de la Mer yet? And why have I not read 93 yet? So I am a huge Victor Hugo fan. I've read Les Mis, I've read Notre-Dame de Paris, I've read L'Homme qui rit, which is my favorite, The Man Who Laughs. It's so dark. It has the thing about Victor Hugo that people don't know about very often, because they usually only read Les Miserables, is that Victor Hugo has a very good sense of very dark, grim humor. And I think L'Homme qui rit, The Man Who Laughs, is a great, it's like just the pivotal example of his dark humor, where just like you're like, ooh, that felt good, but it felt really, really bad too. And so yeah, and Le Dernier Jour d'un Condamné, like that's the last day of a condemned man. Highly recommend it. It's also one of his shortest works. Really easy to read. But yeah, I'm a huge Victor Hugo fan, and I have 3 more of his major classics: the 93, 93, The Toilers of the Sea, Les Travailleurs de la Mer, and then On l'Islande, which I think is just On l'Islande in English. I have no idea. But yeah, 3 major classics that I just haven't read, and it's just, you know, I had this thing, and I still kind of have it, but I'm trying. I think it's time for me to abandon this sort of idea. Is that I always wanted to not read an author work. I never wanted to read more than one work by an author in a particular year, so that if I liked an author, I can stretch the opportunity I have to read that author for a longer time. So it's like, okay, I love Victor Hugo, but I can't read more than one work per year, because otherwise I would read them all at once, and then I would have nothing to look forward to anymore. And I'm starting to think that's a bit of a mistake, and that I should just read as if I feel the need to read an author again in the same year, then I should just go for it. It also has that idea, it's also stopped me from buying multiple books from an author, even if I love them, without having read them. So instead of stocking up on one author's books, it's just like, okay, when I'm ready to read the author's book again, I'll buy one, read it, and then after that I can purchase another one. Because when I start to stockpile books like this, I actually end up not reading them. And now even though I love Victor Hugo, or at least I still think I love Victor Hugo, the motivation to read these books has kind of gone away, because I had a peak with Victor Hugo, and I should have taken advantage of that peak, and I didn't. And now I've swayed elsewhere, and now I'm very much into Japanese lit, I'm very much into Chinese literature and whatnot. And because my focus has shifted, nonfiction as well, my focus has shifted a lot onto wanting to read nonfiction, that there's almost like no room for Victor Hugo. So that's why I have not read these yet. For my Japanese answer, why have I not read a lot of the Japanese classics? I mean, when I did my top 10 favorite Japanese books video, I highly believe in those recommendations. But that list definitely leaves off a few major Japanese classics. And why? It's because I haven't read them yet. To be honest, it's just because I have not read them yet. And the reason for that is because, you know, I'm saving them. Again, it's that idea that, oh, I need to save a work because it's going to be so major and so wonderful, it's going to change my life, and I need to save it for a later time so I can still experience that joy. So I have not read Yasunari Kawabata's Snow Country, major classic. I have not read No Longer Human by Osamu Dazai, huge classic. I have not read Kokoro by Natsumi Soseki, huge classic. Major Japanese classics that are in all the lists of major books you have to read if you read Japanese literature. But I have not read these classics because I've just been holding on to them. Now, I recently read Silence by Shusaku Endo, which is, again, his most famous book, and I've only just now read it, you know, after more than a decade of starting my Japanese literature reading journey. So I am starting to finally say, you know what, stop it, just read these books, and that's what I'm doing. But yeah, for a long time, it was just the idea that, you know, you need to save something to savor it. You know, people don't want to wear the nice dress because they want to save it for, you know, a nice dinner or an anniversary. It's like, no, just wear it. Just wear it. So yeah, that was kind of the idea of why I haven't read those books. But at least the Japanese ones, those are coming soon. All right, next category is fiction. So fiction that isn't classics. And so I went for my non-Japanese choice. I went with My Year of Rest and Relaxation by Tese Mosh Feg. Why have I not read this? Just because I tend not to read a lot of contemporary English language books. A lot of the books that are very popular among on YouTube and whatnot, you know, I'm gonna be perfectly honest. I think a lot of it, the quality is quite subpar, to be honest. You know, people rave about these books, and then I read them, and I'm like, I've read better, you know, and so this is a book that really intrigues me, but I am very much afraid that it's gonna be, I've read better. So that's why I haven't read this, even though I am still very much intrigued by it. It definitely interests me, but I don't want to be disappointed at the same time, and because it definitely falls under that contemporary English language lit category. For it's definitely, there's a higher risk of me actually not enjoying this, or not thinking it's as grandiose and spectacular as everyone says it is. But I still want to read it. In terms of Japanese answers, the question is, why have I not read There's No Such Thing as an Easy Job by Kikuko Tsumura? Yes, Kikuko Tsumura. Why have I not read this yet? Here's the answer. I bought this book when it first came out in December about 2 years ago, and I bought it at the same time as Inheritance from Mother by Minae Mizumura. And ever since I bought these books, this has become a darling on, like, just everywhere. Like, oh, if you read Japanese lit, you have to read this. And so this has become just this darling. And yet, at the same time, this had come out, and no one has talked about this at all. So the reason I haven't read this yet is because I think I'd rather read this first now. Because everyone talks about this, but no one talks about this, because I think they just don't know it exists. And when I first bought these books to begin with, this was the book I thought was going to be the more fascinating of the two. So before I read this, I want to read this, and hopefully this will be at a point to where it'll be so spectacular and amazing. I mean, this author is quite well known. Minae Mizumura is very well, has a very good reputation. So I think this will be fantastic. And so I want to, before I read this that's been recommended everywhere, I want to read this so that I can recommend it everywhere and hopefully spread the love if it deserves it, as I think it will. Next category is nonfiction. So here's the thing about the nonfiction, about why have I not read this yet. The nonfiction on my actual physical TBR list is not that old. I tend to read nonfiction as I receive it, because usually I buy nonfiction because there's an idea in my head, I want to know more about something, and I want to know more about it now. So usually if I buy a nonfiction book, I'm reading it right away. So I actually don't have that much of a stockpile of nonfiction, and my stockpile is not that old. So I don't really have necessarily a, you know, Japan versus not in Japan answer for this. But I do have sort of a book answer, and this is it. So these are 3 nonfiction works about the idea of comfort women, or ianfu in Japan. So you have Comfort Women by Yoshimi Yoshiaki. And then you have The Comfort Women by C. Sarah So. So basically, I got obsessed with this idea a few years ago that I had not read a single book about comfort women in translation or in Japanese. Although that topic in Japanese would, for me, books about the war would be a little bit harder for me to read at this point because I don't have that vocabulary. That's something I want to work on in the near future. I'm getting ready to finally tackle the reading about war in Japanese. But I got obsessed with this idea, the fact that I could not find any literature or nonfiction in translation about this topic, about comfort women, even though it's a major, major deal. And so I looked everywhere, and the best I could find were these 2 books online. And I haven't tried this one yet, but I did try reading this one, the Comfort Women by C. Sarah So. And I actually started reading this, and I read like the beginning of the first chapter, which is Gender, Class, Sexuality, and Labor Under Japanese Colonialism and Imperialist War. So you can see, yeah, I didn't even read chapter 1, I just read the introduction. And the introduction was very, very confusing to me. And I wasn't sure, because the thing is, like, this is a very academic book. This is not your standard nonfiction that is very easy to peruse and very read. This is very, very academic. And I wasn't sure if it was just that I haven't read anything at an academic level in a long time, so I wasn't used to the style anymore, and that's why I was confused. Or was it the author that was actually genuinely confusing? Because the thing is, like, I would read a paragraph, and then 3 paragraphs later, it felt like I was reading something that contradicted what had just been said, even though technically it was supposed to be presenting more precise information about what was just being said. So I was highly confused, and I got turned off, and I was like, this is a little hard for me right now. Maybe just I'm not into it right now, so I put it away. And so because I put this away, I ended up not reading this. So next time when I do decide to pick up these books again, I think I'm going to try this one first, and then I'll read this one after, because I think this one will be easier to read. So that's why I haven't not read these. Now, in the same batch, in the same Amazon order, when I bought these, I had also bought Assimilating Soul. I had bought this book. It's Assimilating Soul, Japanese Rule and the Politics of Public Space in Colonial Korea in 1910 to 1945. And I had bought this because similarly, I had not read anything about the Japanese occupation of Korea. Absolutely nothing. There's nothing out there in translation or that's very easily accessible that I had read. So I bought this. And I did read up until, I don't even know, quite a little bit I had read. And the thing is, like, it's about Japanese rule and the politics of public space. And that's the key word, public space. It's basically just it basically reads like a civil engineering book. So like the history of civil engineering in Korea based off of Japan's occupation. So this wasn't really the book that I want, the nonfiction topic that I wanted it to be. So that's why this has remained unread. Tried, but unread. And then another book, the last nonfiction book I had, that is the longest on my TBR. I purchased this in 2011, and that is Looking for the Lost by Alan Booth. I actually did start reading it a while ago, and I put it down. I read 100 pages, and I put it down because I loved it so much. If that makes sense to you, I don't know, but I loved it so much. So the thing is that Alan Booth, he first wrote the book The Roads to Sata, which is a 2,000-mile walk through Japan. So he really just does a 2,000-mile long walk of the length of Japan, and he talks about all his interactions with the locals. And this is a time in Japan where it was way before the huge tourism boom. So the presence of foreigners in, like, middle of nowhere in Japan was a very rare thing. And people at that time did not know how to interact with these foreigners. And so him making this walk led to these really amazing, endearing, slightly frustrating, but these really interesting interactions with Japanese people in the middle of nowhere Japan. And that book was absolutely beautiful and absolutely stunning. And this is his other book. But here's the thing. This is his only other book, because Alan Booth died prematurely. He died at a very young age, so he only has these 2 books. So I kept this book lingering for a long time, because like, I know I'm gonna love this, but once I read it, again, just like with the Victor Hugo, it's over, it's done, there's nothing left for me to read. And so that's why I hadn't picked it up. Now I did start reading the 115 pages, but it was so amazing that I just put it down, because I was like, no, it's almost gonna be over. So yes, I'm gonna have to start this up again, because it's too good, and I'm just too sad that there's not more like this. So those are my really obscure, really unreasonable reasons for not picking up that book, but that's what it is. Now, you know, we always have obscure reasons not to do something, and you know, it is what it is. That's just how our minds work, right? So the next category is genre fiction, which, to be honest, I don't really like the idea of separating books within genres, because I think genre, you know, we should be able to mix and match genres with, you know, with ease. There should be no reason you can't read one genre over another. So I try not to do that. But I might also be saying that from the perspective of someone who just tends to read, you know, mostly literary fiction. So instead of genre fiction, I decided to change the category to manga. Why have I not read these manga yet? So let's start with a classic, Sailor Moon. Sailor Moon, I actually did finally read, but only the first 8 volumes out of 12. I got very close to the end and I never finished it. And why is that? I don't know why. It's just one of those things. I am one of those people. I am very good at reading something, enjoying it, and then not reading the end. I am very good at that. I do that a lot. I've mentioned this in many other videos, that, you know, with the best example is me reading Musashi by Eiji Yoshikawa, where that is a 1,000-page book, and I never read the last 80 pages. Why? I don't know. Just because. It didn't need an end, you know. So yeah, Sailor Moon, I just never finished it. I will go back to it. I will start from the beginning. I will reread it. It will happen. But I just, for some reason, I just have not read this yet in its entirety. The next book, the biggest shock for anyone who knows that I like soccer manga, would be, why have you not read Captain Tsubasa? Why have you not read this? It's like the pivotal, the most famous soccer manga over. It's well known worldwide. It's well known. It's loved. It's beloved by, you know, Japanese speaking people. It's beloved by French speaking countries, and it's beloved by Spanish speaking countries. Everybody knows Captain Tsubasa from, you know, the biggest soccer manga in the world. Why have I not read it? Just because I know I'm gonna love it. That's it. That's all. I know I'm gonna love it. One other example of a manga I have not read is Kamigami no Itadaki. This is, and here's the thing, you're like, what is that? So this book, it was translated as The Summit of the Gods. And the reason this is weird that I have not read this is that I recommend this book to so many people. And who do I recommend in particular? I recommend this book to people who want to start reading manga but are scared of it, because they all think it's, you know, manga is like fantasy with big eyes and, you know, sword fighting and, or like robots. Like, you know, people are very terrified. Like, that's not what I really know. Really, it's not the type of genre that I typically read or even watch. So I don't really want to start with that. And so I tell people, well, there's very, very realistic manga. And this, The Summit of the Gods, so like I said, it's been translated into English, and I believe it won an award for its translation, is about the summiting of Mount Everest. It's a realistic manga with real art. It has nothing to do with like fantasy and magic and, you know, stuff like that. Like, it's a very realistic manga about tackling Mount Everest at a time where it was almost even more dangerous for now, because they didn't have the equipment that we have now. So very realistic art. And so I recommend this all the time. And you can see I have a bookmark where I only had about the last third of this first volume. There are 3 volumes. And so I have started this and it was amazing, but I just never finished it. Not because I didn't love it. I did love it, but it's just one of those things. I probably was reading it at a time where I wasn't reading that much. And so, or I was distracted by something else, and so I never really continued. But it's still a manga that I highly recommend for people who want to get into manga, or people who just really love mountain climbing and things like that. Like, this is absolutely amazing, and I will finish it myself at some point. The last category is longest on my TBR. So that obviously means the book that's been on my TBR the longest. But if you've watched my videos from when I went back to Texas, the books that have been longest on my TBR are all in Texas, and there are a lot of books that I've decided to give up on and just not even read. So I'm not going to talk about those because there's no point. Even though I still physically own them back in Texas, I pretty much declared I'm not interested and I'm not going to read them. So instead, I decided to choose the longest in page count of my TBR, eliminating 2 books that are a secret and you won't find out until a bit later. So I didn't want to spoil that surprise, so those are not in the category. But I do have 3 books in front of me that are the longest books on my TBR at that point. Why have I not read them? Here's one, Alexandre Dumas. This is a 1,500 page tome that actually includes 2 books. It includes the book Joseph Balsamo, and it contains Le Collier de Laurane, so the Queen's Necklace. And the reason I have not read this is because they are part of, this is very heavy, this is kind of part of a little mini series. And I'm still kind of confused as to, I think this is like kind of at the middle of that series, and so I can't really actually read this yet. So that's why I have not read this, because I need to read other books before I read this. So I made a mistake when I purchased, well, actually I think I was given this. Yeah, I was given that because I tend to not buy these big volumes. So I was given that, and I just can't read it yet because there are other books that come before it. Another book that I book is Voyage en Orient, so A Voyage in the Orient by Lamartine, a very famous French philosopher. I have not read this yet, despite the tabs. The tabs are basically like, so this is Lamartine's journal and his notes when he travels around the Orient. And so my initial idea was to read on the same dates that he writes. But then as I was doing the tabs, I realized this would be like a 2-year project. It was just way too long, and I think I would probably lose interest. So I abandoned that idea. So this is like a 1,100 page book, and so I abandoned that idea. So now I'm just trying to think of when am I actually going to pick this up. So that's why I haven't read this yet. And then the last book is The Brothers Karamazov by Dostoevsky. This book is only like, yeah, 760 pages or so, and I have already actually read 148 pages. I had attempted reading this a little while, and the reason I haven't read this, or to be honest, the reason why I haven't finished this, is because I'm not a big fan of Dostoevsky. I've read a few of his books. I have read Crime and Punishment, which I enjoyed. I read The Idiot, which I liked better. But in general, I never really enjoyed reading his books. I've read them, I've appreciated them to a certain sense, but I don't actually really enjoy the process. And this one, the first 148 pages, I wasn't really enjoying myself whatsoever, and I wasn't really enjoying the topic at hand either. So this is a book that most likely will never be completed. I will most likely just abandon this. I did say, because I was thinking about reading this, because Tristan from Tristan and the Classics, Tristan, please come back. I hope you're okay. I don't know what's going on, but please come back. Please come back to YouTube. But this was one of his books he said he wanted to complete this year, and so I picked it up thinking, okay, if I don't read it this year with Tristan, then I probably won't ever read it ever again. So we're kind of going in that direction. But yeah, this is another book. It's one of the longer books on my TBR that I have not read yet, and that is why. So anyway, thank you so much to Laurane Macquart for tagging me. I hope you appreciate that I finally replied to one of your tag requests. If anybody else knows of any other videos, interesting videos that you think I might like, that where people respond to this tag, definitely let me know who did them and let me know that I should check them out. Otherwise, I hope that you enjoyed this video and my nice yellow highlighter, neon highlighter yellow marker dress. Very happy about this dress. I'm gonna wear it out and have everyone stare at me. But yeah, thank you so much for watching this video, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye!